You showed me like I was nothing, but I've spent my whole career earning the badge he thought I stole. If you've ever had to prove you belonged in a room you built, like and subscribe." I still hear the click of his hand on his holster. It happened on a Tuesday, so quiet it almost felt like a setup, the kind of cool, overcast morning in D.C. that made the marble buildings look even whiter, even more untouchable, like they were carved from rules that only some of us ever got to write. I had just left a meeting at the Justice Department, still in uniform, still sharp in every crease and polish. Lieutenant Commander Amara Tate, black, female, and 39 years old with 15 years of federal policing under my belt. 10 of those in internal affairs, and 3 citations for exemplary conduct. I wasn't there to impress anyone, but I wasn't going to shrink either. I walked with pride, until a white Metro officer barely out of his 20s, posted on crowd control, stepped into my path like he was cutting off a suspect, not a superior officer. "ID," he barked before I could even respond to his raised palm. I was glancing over my rank pins like they were decorations from Party City. I paused, tried to de-escalate with calm. "I'm with DOJ. Here for oversight briefings." But he didn't care. He stepped closer. "Step back. Now. You don't belong here." Then he shoved me. Flat out. Both hands. Just hard enough to jolt me. Just hard enough to get a reaction, like he was looking for one. I didn't flinch the way he expected. Didn't scream. Didn't curse. But the cold that washed through me wasn't fear. It was fury, tight and coiled like the pressurized calm I'd spent years mastering in rooms full of officers who never thought I was the one in charge. A small crowd had seen it, tourists mostly, phones already raised like they sensed a confrontation brewing before it even popped off. I took a step back, opened my jacket just enough to let the badge flash gold, and the reaction in his face, God, it was instant. Like someone yanked the arrogance out of them with a vacuum hose. His eyes darted between my badge, my bars, and the phone cameras, and he realized, too late, that he had messed up. That I wasn't just some civilian playing dress-up, like another officer whispered nearby, thinking I wouldn't hear. "I've dealt with microaggressions all my career, the careful ma'am, or are you lost? In meetings I was leading, or the way some rookies talked over me when I gave briefings. But this was something else. This was the kind of blatant disrespect that can only be rooted in the quiet belief that someone like me can't possibly hold power. "Lieutenant Commander Tate," I said slowly, each syllable a drop of gasoline, "DOJ Internal Affairs, Office of Police Conduct Oversight. And you just laid hands on a federal officer in uniform." The silence that fell was so sharp it rang. The tourists filming didn't move. A senior officer from Metro PD jogged over, probably summoned by the radios that had suddenly gone off like popcorn kernels in the background. "Tate," he said, clearly recognizing me from a past briefing. "Oh, hell. That's when the cop who shoved me, the one with the buzz cut and swollen pride, tried to step back like that would undo what he did. I didn't let him. I requested his name and badge number, out loud, 3 times, for the record and for the cameras. He gave it, voice tight, and I wrote it in my notebook even though I already knew it would be in my report by day's end. You see, what he didn't know is that I wasn't just going to file a complaint. I was the complaint process. The officer would be on leave by sundown, pending an official misconduct review, and that was only the beginning. Because what he did wasn't just an isolated mistake. It was a symptom of something deeper. How many other black civilians had he shoved or dismissed or charged with resisting because they didn't have the badge to defend themselves? I intended to find out. But the part that shook me, that stayed with me long after the crowd dispersed and the cameras stopped rolling, was the look in his eyes when he realized I outranked everyone in the immediate area. It wasn't just fear. It was disbelief. Like the idea of a black woman having authority, real, institutional authority, broke something in him. And maybe that's what justice feels like sometimes. Not a gavel slamming or a handcuff clicking, but a mirror being held up so close that the truth becomes inescapable. I left him standing there with the commanding officer who suddenly had no choice but to explain my rank to him in front of everyone. I didn't look back, but I heard the senior officer's voice crack as he said, "That's your boss's boss's boss." Funny how a uniform can mean everything or nothing depending on the skin it's wrapped around. That day, mine meant everything. They put him on desk duty, pending review, a polite term for a man-sized timeout. But we both knew what was coming. I didn't want vengeance. I wanted exposure. I wanted the truth to be undeniable, even to people who pretend systemic racism is a ghost story we tell to stir up trouble. My name, Lieutenant Commander Amara Tate, was suddenly circulating in every internal email at Metro PD, even the ones that used to ignore my memos. That push? It didn't just knock the breath out of my chest. It cracked open the silence around a whole department that had been shielding bad behavior with brotherhood for decades. His name was Officer Seth Drayton. 3 years on the force, spotless on paper, polite in interviews, the kind of cop they show in brochures shaking hands with kids at parades. But behind that was a record of civilian complaints quietly closed, most of them from Black and Latino residents. Unlawful stops, aggressive language, one complaint marked, no body cam footage. That just happened to involve a teen boy who ended up face down in an alley. It took one shove for me to open that drawer, and once I did, I didn't stop. My office at DOJ had jurisdiction to dig, and so I did. The deeper I went, the uglier it got. But the department didn't want to talk about patterns, they wanted it to stay about me and this isolated incident. They offered me a public apology, a press release with all the usual language, respect, protocol, valued service. But I refused to let them slap a band-aid on a bullet wound. So, I turned down their script and went to the community instead. I stood up at a Ward 7 town hall, in full dress uniform, and told the entire packed room what happened. I told them how a cop looked at me, saw a black woman in uniform, and still assumed I didn't belong. I told them how I'd been the only black woman in a room of 50 officers during training, how they called me Miss Diversity behind my back, how I was asked to smile more in briefings, and how every time I asked a hard question about use of force stats, the room got quiet like I was picking a fight instead of doing my job. The silence in that room was a different kind of heavy. It wasn't fear or shame, it was recognition. I saw nods from parents, students, elders, people who'd been gaslit into thinking they were imagining the slights, the escalations, the eyes that narrowed the second they stepped into white spaces. One young woman stood up and said, "You're the first officer I've ever seen tell the truth while still wearing the badge." That hit me harder than the shove. And it gave me fuel. I didn't want Drayton to just get written up. I wanted the entire system that trained him to believe he was entitled to shove someone like me to feel the heat. So I requested body cam reviews from his entire year on the force. It took weeks. Mountains of paperwork. Meetings with command staff who looked at me like I was starting trouble instead of solving it. But I knew what I was doing. I brought receipts. One video showed Drayton mocking a Latina grandmother's English during a traffic stop. Another showed him pushing a young black man against a cruiser and muttering, "They're always running," even though the man had just asked if he could reach for his license. That video went viral after the review board released it. My request, stamped and approved. Drayton's defenders tried to say he was under stress, following procedure, learning. But the city saw what I saw, a pattern, a disease. And I just traced it to patient zero. Within a month, Drayton was off the force, not just suspended, but dismissed under conduct violations. The union raised hell, tried to protect him, but couldn't fight the footage. Couldn't fight the data. Couldn't fight me. And for the first time, the department sent a message that accountability didn't stop at skin color or at the rank on your collar. But I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired. Because I knew this wasn't the end. I knew another Drayton was already in a cruiser somewhere, already building his own pile of closed complaints. So I started something. A new training initiative, mandatory for all field officers, written and led by people of color with decades in the system, not theory, but lived experience. We called it Command Presence, the power you don't see. It wasn't just about bias, it was about how race, gender, and perception intersect in the split-second decisions cops make every day. They fought it. They groaned. But they came. And some listened. Not all, but enough. Enough to start shifting the weight. Enough to stop the next shift before it happens. And maybe that's how change really works, not with a bang, but with a moment that forces the air to stop. That shatters the illusion of fairness. That cracks the foundation just enough for the light to get in. 3 months later, I stood in front of a room full of fresh recruits at the Metro Police Academy, the same building where Drayton had been trained to see his badge as a shield and my blackness as a threat. Behind me, a screen read Command Presence, Power, Perception, and Prejudice. I didn't dress the part of their hero. No cape, no flash, just my uniform, 3 service ribbons, and the calm steel of someone who had spent her whole life proving she belonged in rooms that were never built for her. "I want you to remember something," I told them. "Every time you interact with someone, they walk away with a story. And that story might shape how they trust the next officer they meet." I told them what happened that morning at the DOJ gate. I told them about the shove, the look on Drayton's face, the phone cameras, the silent tourists, the apology that never came. But I also told them what came after. How the community rallied. How my inbox flooded with letters from mothers, sons, and retired officers who said, "I've seen this too. And thank you for not letting it go." Drayton had since moved out of state, reportedly applying for a job in private security. No force would take him, not after the footage and the report. His name had become a warning, a case study. Not the way I ever wanted to make change, but a way nonetheless. Meanwhile, the department had quietly pushed through policy shifts I demanded. Expanded bias training led by officers of color, an oversight board with civilian voices, and new rules about how complaints were archived and reopened. Small wins. Real ones. But the thing that stayed with me most wasn't the policies or the press. It was my son, Zaire, who had seen the video on the news, then came to me after school and asked, "Mom, were you scared?" I looked him in the eye and told the truth. No. I was tired. And I was done being silent. Because silence, I told him, is how systems survive. But truth, loud, clear, unshakable, truth cracks things open. And once a crack forms, the wall never holds the same way again.